Welcome back to the shop, into the channel. Trying to make some time to get back out here in the shop again. And I got a quick little job here for the machine shop down at the B&O Roundhouse where I volunteer on Saturdays. This is a rack from the Walker Turner / Kearney and Trecker drill press that we have in the shop, and it's used for elevating the table. Now, technically, there's nothing really wrong with this rack. We did have to replace the gear in that elevating mechanism because some teeth of it were stripped off. But we figured, okay, while we have this thing apart, should we go ahead and replace the rack? Now, we did find a new piece of rack material from McMaster Carr, and it looks like it's the same pitch, so why not? The only problem with this rack really is its length. We can only raise the table up so far. So what we decided to do is go ahead and replace the rack, and we'll just replace it with a longer one. Well, the drill press is a Walker Turner, but it was manufactured during the time in which Kearney and Trecker owned them, and you can't get parts for this stuff anymore. And the rack that we have here is about 1/4 of an inch too thick. So I am going to need to machine down the thickness of this rack so it will fit inside the gearbox on that drill press. This is not going to be just a straightforward milling operation, although it would seem like it might be, for a couple of different reasons. Number one is the length of this rack is longer than any of the tables of machines that I have in my shop. And secondly, I have the feeling when I take off 1/4 of an inch of this rack, it's going to turn into a banana. I'm sure I'll be able to address those issues in one way or another, but for starters, I need to get this machine set up with a slab mill. Well, the first thing I want to do is determine the height of the rack when all of the machining is finished. So I'm going to put the original rack on the table and clamp it down. Then I'm going to raise the knee up until the cutter is touching it. That tells me what my zero will be, or at least my target for the machining up. Using a piece of paper here and some tweezers and just raising the knee up slightly until it rips it out of the tweezers, that tells me I'm just a couple of thousandths shy of that, which is more than enough tolerance for this particular project. I can take the original out of the machine now and put in the new part that needs to be milled down. I do want to move the table all the way over to the left as far as it will go, because that's my starting point, and that's where I'm going to set up the new piece so that I can machine the end of it from here. I'll bring in the new part now and make sure that I'll clamp it in so that I can machine this far right end of it. And of course that means it's going to be hanging over the left edge of the table. That's okay. We're going to have to move this periodically in order to be able to machine the entire length. This is not a precision part, so if it's off by a little bit here and there, it's not a big deal. Which is why if it turns into a banana, it's also not that big of a deal. I am going to be using a bunch of different clamps. Part of the reason here is I'm going to need to move them. So I'll put a couple of them down here on the far right end. We'll clamp it a little bit in the middle. We'll clamp it on the end. And as I machine this and get a little bit closer to one of these clamps, I can pause the machine, remove that clamp, and put it to the other side of the milling cutter. That way it's always secured down to the table, but I'm not having to mill off any of the clamps either. Should go okay for this part. Well, I forgot to hit record when I started machining here, but I got the oil drip going over top of the cutter to keep this well lubricated. And I'm only taking off about 125 thousandths on this pass. But I have a feeling maybe I can do the full 250 thousandths. So I'm going to raise the knee up here a little bit and try taking the full 250. See if I can't slow this thing down enough. Play with the feed rate a little bit to see if we can't do a full depth pass. Maybe I won't have to be moving clamps around and having to take multiple passes at this thing. Yeah, that's a definite no. That was chattering way too much. So I'll just
Yeah.
lower the knee by 125 thousandths, and we'll just take multiple passes at each run. That's okay. It would have been nice to do this at full depth, but maybe if I would have spent a little more time playing with speeds and feeds, I could have come up with something. This cutter is pretty sharp. Could it be sharper? Maybe. I don't know. But doing this in 2 passes won't be that big of a deal. I think I might try adjusting the feed rate a little bit. I think I'm running about 1.75 inches per minute right now. So I'll try maybe moving that up a little bit and see if we get any chattering. That's as close as I'm going to be able to get to that clamp, so I'll back off. I'll raise it the other 125 thousandths and take the second pass before doing this again, moving the clamp and continuing the machine work. Now that this back end here has been fully machined to what I think is the right length, I can do a sanity check here and check it against the original rack. Yeah, and that's going to work. That is definitely good enough for what it needs to be. And that's as far as I can go before hitting into that clamp. So I'll take a minute here, clear out some of these chips, and we'll move the clamp now over to the end, this right end that's been fully machined, and keep going down the line. Well, I've come up to another clamp here, but I think instead of backing up and then machining off the next 125 thousandths, I'm going to just move the clamp down a little bit further and machine a little bit more at this first pass depth. I am going to move this clamp here from the back up a little bit closer to the cutter just to provide a little bit of rigidity here in the part. Well, that's the extent of the table travel to the right. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to lower the knee so I can get over top of all those other clamps. And then I'm going to come back to where I left off with the full depth cut. Now I know this is going to leave a little bit of a blemish where the two machined areas come together, but that's just going to have to be, again, this is not a precision part. If this was a precision part, I probably wouldn't be doing it on this machine. I'd figure out a different way to do it. But we'll raise the knee up here until we're at our target depth and start machining again. Well, one thing I do like about using oil as a cutting fluid here on stuff like this is the chips kind of just clump together. They don't fly all over the place. Of course, that's also a downside because they'll start to haystack in front of the part. So I am periodically taking the brush and trying to get those out of the way. I'm going to get a little bit risky, maybe dangerous here, and relocate some of these clamps while this thing is moving. It's only moving 1 3/4 inches a minute, so I think I have a little bit of time. to move that clamp out of the way and bring up one of the clamps from the rear without creating too much of a problem. And that's the end of my travel. So now I need to stop everything because I'm going to need to unclamp this part and move it all the way over to the right. Put a clamp here at the very end. This will come off, of course, as we get closer here to machining this. But all these chips here sitting in the T-slot are getting in the way. So I need to clean those up here using the shop vac. Of course, with all this oil around all of these chips, it does make them a bit heavier and makes it a little bit more of a challenge to get them out of the T-slots. Well, I think I have this thing clamped down good enough so I can come back and start machining off this quarter inch. Again, I'll start with a first pass of about 125 thousandths. Getting some chatter here at the end of this thing. Not sure why. Not that it really matters at this point, because I'm just trying to make this thinner, not necessarily make it pretty. So I'm almost at the end of my travel anyway, even though I still have to remove that clamp. I think I'll do that last. So at this point, I'm going to stop the travel, and we'll come all the way back to where I need to start over again in order to finish this full depth of cut. Well, to finish this last bit off, I'll need to remove this clamp on the end and relocate it around to the back side of the cutter. Well, I'll raise the knee so I only have about 125 thousandths remaining and take the last of 2 passes. Well, with that pass complete, I'll come back and lower it back down to my target and take the last pass. Well, that's it for the milling work. So I can lower the knee. We'll get this cleaned off a little bit and unclamped. And we still have one more machining operation to do on this. Well, in the original rack, there's a cross hole here that's drilled in the end, and that's for a pin that pins this rack to the base of the drill press, so it can't move. At least it can't be pulled up. I've got the appropriate size drill here, so I just need to get it clamped into the vise so we can duplicate that feature in the new part. Well, I have a gauge pin here I'm going to put into my drill chuck, and I'll use that to locate the original hole using the X and Y of the table. And once I get it located, I'll set the end stop here on the end, so when I put the new part in, it'll position the drill over top of the hole where it should be in the new part. Of course, I don't drill any holes unless I have some anchor lube and my 1/4 inch spotting drill. Well, that's all the machining done, and it looks pretty good. Although, my fear has come true. It's a banana. Take it over to the welding table, and you'll see what I mean. It's a little bit more obvious over there. You can see just how bad this is. Is this usable? Maybe. I'm going to take it over to the arbor press here and try to relieve some of this bananaism and see if that does any better. Might need to do this a few times. Well, that's a little bit better. It ain't great, but we'll give it a try on the drill press, and if we have to do some more to it, then we will. Well, sorry for the crappy vertical cell phone video here showing this installed, but it's the best I could do at the time. But here it is installed. We did make that new ring that sits at the top of the rack, and that's just there to keep the table from going up any higher. It does work the way it's intended, and that's a good thing. But that's going to be it for this video. Thanks a lot for watching. I appreciate you who have subscribed, and if you haven't subscribed, consider hitting that subscribe button. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.